Dahomey slave market was a notorious slave market that sold thousands of Yoruba natives. Casualties of the jihad, the Portuguese bought them in large numbers and put them in slave ships to the Caribbeans. This market was controlled by a powerful Yoruba woman called Efun. She was descended from the goddess of wealth, Olokun. She had a birthmark on her right hand, shaped like a calabash. Anything she touched instantly transformed to wealth. Every business she ventured into prospered in ways beyond human understanding. Although not literate in the Western way, she was very good with arithmetic and has a strong photographic memory. Efun was beautiful to behold. She carried herself elegantly and commanded respect at a market where she rose to be governess. She lived in the 1860s during the age of the civil wars in Yoruba country. Efun's legend at Dahomey was during the reign of King Gale. Dahomey shared borders with a powerful ancient kingdom of the Yoruba country called Egbatedo. Egbatedo was a big metropolis, a short-lived refugee settlement for displaced Egba warriors, built by a powerful Egba warrior called Arion. He had a large army of over 40,000 warriors and a large court that served as a barracks for his private militia. At the Dahomey market, Egba slaves captured from raids into Yoruba cities were brought to be sold, and merchants from the coastal cities of Lagos and Dahomey came there to buy slaves. On an evening, while she walked through a market, she saw a boy about to be shot. He was high with fever, and the merchants did not want to buy him, fearing that he would not make the harsh journey to the New World. Touched by motherly instincts, he offered to purchase the boy. His name was Olubodun, a noble from a raided Yoruba city. She nursed him back to health and adopted him as her son. He grew up from a family of fabric merchants, and with the support of his adopted mother, he set up a fabrics manufacturing factory. The Portuguese merchants bought the fabrics in large numbers and sold it to the commoners in the New World. Olubodun became very wealthy under the protection of his new mother at a young age of 12. Arion was enraged with news that the Dahomey market was notorious for selling his native kinsmen and women of Egbatedo as slaves. He summoned some of his captains and told them to raid the metropolis at Dahomey, burn down the market, and bring back the merchants of Dahomey as prisoners. Arion's captains laid a siege on the market at Dahomey, burnt it down, and brought many of the traders at the market to exit in as prisoners. They invaded the palace of King Gil of Dahomey and killed the guards. The king fled from the city through a secret private gate into the plains with his favorite wife and some members of his family, accompanied by his closest bodyguards. Among the captives brought to Egbatedo was Efun. Arion was in his courtyard when his soldiers arrived with captives from Dahomey. Efun was brought to his presence along with other captives and introduced to him as the leader of the market. Arion told her that she committed a serious offense by permitting sale Yoruba's citizens at Dahomey market. Efun responded that Dahomey was not responsible for the collapse of Oyo and the invasions that led to raiding of the cities. Arion responded that there was no excuse for causing pain and sorrow to many families. For this, she was guilty of death and would be punished. He signaled for his soldiers to take the captives away and put them in prison. Following evening, Arion's diviner visited him in his private courts. The diviner spread the tools of his divination and made incantations. He told Arion of the captured woman from Dahomey and advised him not to have her executed. She represents Adje, goddess of wealth, and if her resources are put into good use, it would bring prosperity to a fast-growing city of Egbatedo. She can be guided for good and rise to be a woman of worth in Egbatedo. Next day, Arion ordered ladies-in-waiting to get Efun from prison. She was taken to the river and given a bath. Clothes and jewelries were put on her, and she was brought to the courts of Arion. To her surprise, Arion told her he had decided not to have her executed. She would also be granted her freedom, but on one condition: she would help build the Egbatedo market into a leading central merchant hub. She agreed. Arion had a new market built for her on his vast estate. The market was on an expanse of land. Efun transformed the new market into a thriving hub for mercantile trading. She built an oil mill, manufactured leather products, and forged farm products and weapons at the market. Using her charms and unusual gifts, Efun introduced merchandise from the caravan traders from North Africa and the Middle East. In a few moons, the new market became a strong hub for trade in the interiors. For the next few days, Efun worked with the masons to build markets in the rapidly expanding market. She sent for her slaves at Dahomey. Olubadun was missing. When she asked after him, she was told he was sold to Portuguese merchants after the siege on the order of the King Gil of Dahomey to raise funds to rebuild the city. This made Efun sad. She had grown fond of her adopted son and hoped to set up a fabric warehouse at Egbatedo for him. The messenger that brought the news was Olokun, head of her security. In the evenings, while Arion trained with his warriors in the courtyard, Efun would come by, sit with her maidens, and watch him with admiration. She had great admiration for his fighting skills. He was an alpha male, very skilled in sword fighting. On occasions, she would invite him to a picnic and they would eat in the plains. She asked him why he had no woman in his life. He responded, "A time of war is not a time for love." He did not wish to have a reason to fear death. Love would make him wish to live, write poetries, and cuddle in bed, rather than train in the fields and fight in the hottest parts of battle. Few months after the campaign, delegates from Dahomey, led by King Gil, met with Arion in the plains to discuss terms of peace. Arion said the condition for peace is that captives from raided cities in Yoruba country must not be sold at Dahomey anymore, and that soldiers of Dahomey must not raid cities in the Yoruba country for captives to sell to the Portuguese. The king of Dahomey agreed to the terms. He would not sell Yoruba slaves at Dahomey anymore. He also accepted to let go of all the booties that Egbatedo's soldiers carted away with when they raided Dahomey. But he had only one condition. He requested that Efun be returned to Dahomey so she could retake her post as leader of the market. Arion responded that Efun had made Egbatedo her home, that she was a free woman and had the right to choose where she wanted to live. King of Dahomey responded that Efon's future was tied to Dahomey, and she would not agree to any terms that did not include her return to Dahomey. The arguments got heated, and Jagun, a senior captain in Arion's army, made a suggestion that they should summon Efun and ask her if she wanted to remain at Egbatedo or go back to Dahomey. Efun was brought to the meeting camp. When asked of her preference, she said she had chosen to stay at Egbatedo. It was her new home, and she had grown to love its people. This greatly displeased the king of Dahomey. He claimed that he had been cheated and the governess of his market bewitched against him. He left the meeting unhappy. That evening, Efun went to the private courts of Arion and spoke with him all evening on a mountain close to his palace. Arion was madly in love with her. She sat with him in the courts to attend to citizens of Egbatedo in the evenings. Arion made her a judge in one of the quarters of the city. Olokun, head of her security details, was usually close to her. He had only one duty, and that was to protect her. The king of Dahomey planned campaigns against Egbatedo. He invited Portuguese mercenaries to join his army. Portugal wanted the slave market at Dahomey revived. They desperately needed slaves in the plantation fields of South America. In protest, Egbatedo laid another siege on Dahomey. This time around, Dahomey would not be an easy pushover. The Portuguese mercenaries in Dahomey have reinforced the city. As the Portuguese mercenaries with large ships at the coasts of Dahomey discussed with King Gale on how to divide spoils of war in a future campaign into Yoruba countries, Egbatedo. Gale said he wanted no spoils of war. All he wanted was a rich merchant woman and governess of Egbatedo market. Soldiers of Portugal were deployed to Egbatedo regions. They camped at Dahomey and prepared for war against Egbatedo. The token visited Dahomey and met with King Gele of Dahomey. He told the king a very important secret, that before Arion goes to war, he takes a pilgrimage to a priest a few miles from the city. He goes with a handful of unarmed guards because no weapons of war were permitted in the city, as mortals do not stand in front of the gods bearing arms and charms. He told the king that Arion was planning a trip to the temple on the next full moon to prepare for the war with Portugal. King of Dahomey told Olokun that he would arrange for the execution of Arion. The king and the traitor hatched a plan. Cavalry horsemen would attack Arion on his way to his shrine, but Olokun must remain at Egbatedo with a few guards. Immediately he hears of the news he has to arrest Efun and bring her back to Dahomey. In reward, he would be made new governor of a conquered Ecbatano. King of Dahomey invited a general from the soldiers at Portugal, camped at his gates to his palace. Alfonso. He told him that he wanted him to give him some soldiers that would lie in wait for Ariane on his pilgrimage to the temple for cleansing before war. Alfonso placed 400 soldiers in the thick forest on the pathway to Ariane's shrine. He also stationed some soldiers close to Ecbatano to have Efun arrested. A few days before the attempted ambush on Ariane, King Dom Luís of Portugal sent a message to Alfonso. "I am curious to know more about this mystery woman who is so important that the king of Dahomey does not care for cattle, goats, gold, and slaves. To him, she is worth much more than all the spoils of war from a prosperous city in the Yoruba country. When you have this mystery woman as your prisoner, do not hand her over to the king at Dahomey. Put her on her ship and send her to me at Portugal. I wish to access her true worth and have her in my service." Ariane marched to the borders of a sacred forest to visit the temple of the great priest. He had his soldiers wait by the rocks and went further with 10 guards. As they halfway to their destination, the Portuguese soldiers laid an ambush on Ariane and his few guards. Ariane fought back, but he was outnumbered. He was shot and killed. News of Ariane's death reached Ecbatano the next day. The whole city went into panic. The guards of Ariane related the incident to Efun. She broke down and wept. While the city was still in mourning, a large army of warriors showed up at the gates. The soldiers of Ecbatano feared to go to war without their leader. Afonso, captain of the Portuguese army, sent some emissaries to the city to meet with a council of elders. He sent a message for peace, saying, "The war can be avoided, and Ariane's body returned on 2 conditions. There must be no more aggression against Dahomey, and no further attacks on slave campaigns and markets in the coastal city. Ecbatano must also hand over the wealthy merchant lady, Efun, and surrender the city as a vassal state of Dahomey." Events of the interiors reached Lagos. A wealthy local merchant in Lagos heard of the news. His name was Philip Meffrey. He owned a large textiles manufacturing company at Marina, with employees over 100. When Philip heard of the legends of the merchant woman at Ecbatano, he knew immediately who she was. She was his adopted mother. Philip was the young Olokun. He was sold into slavery at Brazil. While in Brazil, he worked hard and bought his freedom. He prospered as a trader and eventually returned to his homeland in Africa, settling in Lagos. Fearing the Portuguese soldiers would burn down Ecbatano, Meffrey recruited warriors from Porto Novo. He also paid for Hausa mercenaries. He reached out to Ecbatano and promised support. At the time, Efun was in hiding under the protection of the captains of Ariane. Rumors of her immense wealth and her enchanting powers as the goddess of fortune, who drew wealth to herself from commerce through some unknown mystic, got to the local and white merchants at Lagos. Beechcroft told Meffrey that he was interested in the woman and would provide military support. He also was worried with the Portuguese rising influence in Yoruba country. The British marked the territory for a colony and wanted it annexed into the British Empire. Beechcroft promised to reinforce Philip with Indian regiments, but he must have a fund brought to Lagos for him to access. If he had her settled at Balogun Market with the legends that followed her, it would transform the region into a prime real estate. Everyone would pay fortunes for warehouses at the market where the goddess of wealth traded. To be continued.